8:52 a.m. A colleague says one sentence about your work in a corridor. 6 words, nothing important, and you carry it to your desk feeling half an inch taller. 11:20 a.m. You find out the opportunity you'd quietly started thinking of as yours has gone to somebody else. You don't say much about it. It sits there. 2:05 p.m. A package turns up a day early. Small lift. 4:30 p.m. Somebody repeats something you said in a tone you never used, and the rest of the afternoon has a stone in it. Nothing dramatic happened today. Your mood got picked up and put down 4 times, and nobody asked your permission. Somebody described the forces underneath that pattern more than 2,000 years before performance reviews, group chats, or next-day delivery existed. I'm Matt, and this is Buddha's wisdom. There are 8 of them. Your phone isn't one of the 8. Your bank balance isn't one of the 8. Social media isn't one of the 8. The algorithm isn't one of the 8. Those are addresses. Something much older keeps happening at them. More than 2,000 years ago, the Buddha named 8 conditions that keep doing this to people, and he made a fairly enormous claim about them. The world turns around these 8. It's in the Anguttara Nikaya, and the reference is 8.6 if you want to look it up. The Pali is Atta Lokaduma, 8 worldly conditions. Gain and loss, praise and blame, pleasure and pain, status and disgrace. That's the list most people remember. The discourse keeps going, and what comes next changes how the whole list works. You save for the house. 6 years, maybe 8. You look at listings you can't afford at 11 at night, and you run the numbers one more time. You know the exact deposit figure. You've said no to things because of it, and yes to things because of it, and a decent share of your 20s or 30s has been organized around a number. Then you buy the house. For 8 years, the question was whether you could get it. Within about a day, the question quietly changes. Now it's what happens if you lose it. Same house, same brick, same street, same slightly wrong angle in the kitchen. Nothing about the building moved. Everything about your relationship to it did. The gain and the possibility of losing it turned up on the same afternoon. The discourse calls these conditions. The tradition that grew up around it pictures them as winds, weather that hits you, moves you, and passes, which is where you'll see the phrase 8 worldly winds. Look at what happens after the good news, because that's the part nobody watches. You got the thing. Then you started defending the thing. Insurance is sensible. Fixing the roof is sensible. What I'm pointing at is the checking that grows up around the thing. You look up what the house is worth now, and you weren't planning to buy or sell anything. I do a version of this with a bank app roughly as often as I clean the kitchen, and neither one feels like much of a decision. And the number that would finally feel comfortable has a habit of moving up alongside the balance. You tell yourself the guarding stops later, once the mortgage is smaller, once the job feels safe. Most of us have been saying later for a while now. Then there's the other half, and you already know what loss feels like, because you've had the small version 100 times. The screen cracks, the train's canceled, a number goes down. A plan you were looking forward to evaporates on a Thursday morning, and the rest of Thursday has a flatness in it you'd struggle to justify out loud. Loss doesn't have to be big to move you, it only has to turn up. And watch how fast the 8-year house becomes ordinary. 4 months in, you stop seeing the front door. The wanting doesn't stop. It picks up something else and carries on, and the house quietly joins the list of things you could lose. Nothing about the house changed. You started guarding it, and guarding is unpaid work with no end date. The first pair usually attaches to something you can point at. The next one needs nothing except a sentence. Try this in real time. Think of a compliment somebody gave you 5 years ago. Actual words, actual person. Now think of something cruel somebody said to you 5 years ago. For a lot of us, the second one showed up before the first one finished loading. Some of you had the cruel sentence ready before I finished asking for it, complete with the tone and who else could hear it. That's a tendency, and it isn't universal. Plenty of people don't have it, and the ones who do never chose it. Where it does run, the two halves pull with very unequal force. Praise lands, feels good, and thins out. Blame lands and moves in. Here's how far it reaches into an ordinary day. You give a presentation. 20 people tell you it went well. One person raises an eyebrow at slide 9. Drive home, and guess whose face is in the car with you? You run a small business, and there are 400 happy customers you barely think about, and one review from March you can recite. The arithmetic barely seems to matter. 20 to 1, 400 to 1, and you're still carrying the 1 at 8 in the evening. The other half looks harmless, which is the whole trick with it. You know how a compliment behaves. It lands, it's lovely, and by lunchtime you'd have to work to recall the exact words. Then something goes quietly looking for the next one. Praise feels like fuel. That's exactly why it gets a pass, and it comes back later in this video. Blame works backwards through time as well. Maybe you still remember something a parent or a teacher said to you years ago. They may have forgotten the exchange long before you did. The sentence carried on working without them. And it isn't only the unfair ones that stay. Some of the sentences that lodge hardest are the ones with something in them, where the person was partly right and picked the worst possible way to say it. Those get replayed differently. You argue with them. You build the answer you should have given, years late, in the shower. I know people who have been rehearsing that speech for 10 years. The price of entry matters here, because this pair is the cheapest of the 4. The first pair can take years to build. Blame takes 11 words and a tone. Somebody with no power over you at all can walk off with your afternoon for free, and a whole evening gets consumed by a sentence that took 2 seconds to say. Think about which one arrived first when I set that exercise, and how hard you had to work for the other one. The one that hurt got a room in the house, and the rest got the doorstep. Praise and blame need another person in the story. The next pair can reach you in an empty room. When did you last have absolutely nothing to do? Not relaxing. Nothing. 5 minutes early somewhere, no book, no conversation, no phone, nothing needing you. If you had to think about that for a while, that's interesting already. One thing about this pair before we go on. The translations give pleasure and pain, and that sounds like the big stuff. Serious pain deserves care, and nothing in this chapter argues otherwise. Most days, though, you meet the quiet end of the same pair. Comfortable and uncomfortable, pleasant and unpleasant, boredom, waiting, an awkward silence, 40 seconds at a red light. That's the end running your Tuesday, and that's the end this chapter is about. Put yourself in it. You're early for an appointment. The room's quiet, there's a clock, and you have 4 minutes. Nothing hurts and nothing's wrong. And something in you treats the situation as a problem needing a solution. Sometimes the hand is halfway to the phone before you catch yourself doing it. Remember the beginning of the video? Your phone isn't one of the 8. It's one place this pair often shows up. Then look at how much of ordinary life has been arranged so that gap rarely opens at all. A screen in the lift, something playing over the queue. That gap has been closing for years, and very little of it got decided by you. In 2014, a team led by Timothy Wilson published a set of studies in the journal Science. In one of them, 42 people who had already said they'd pay money to avoid an electric shock sat alone for 15 minutes with a button that delivered one. You've probably heard the headline. People would rather electrocute themselves than sit with their own thoughts. The real numbers are quieter. Most of the 42 never touched the button. 18 pressed it at least once. One outlier pressed it 190 times, which helped make the story famous. Other researchers went back to what those 18 said about why they'd done it, and most of them mentioned curiosity. Wilson's team disagreed with that reading, and nobody has settled the argument. So it doesn't prove people can't stand their own thoughts. What we've got is one very strange 15-minute experiment about what people do when almost nothing is happening. Make of it what you like. The pleasant side is easier to miss. Nothing about it feels like a problem. The episode ends and the next one starts itself, and you let it. You eat something you weren't hungry for at 9 at night. You put music on for a 2-minute job in the kitchen. None of that is a crime. Watch how automatic the reach has become, though. Pleasure turns up and you reach. Discomfort turns up and you reach for the exit. Which is where one distinction matters, because the discourse doesn't make it for us. Discomfort is one thing. A life organized so that discomfort never turns up at all becomes a second thing. You probably never designed it as a system. It accumulated, one reasonable convenience at a time. You bought a phone, you got a subscription, and something's been playing while you cook ever since. And somewhere along the way, the gap stopped opening. Can you remember the last time you were uncomfortable and did nothing about it? Pleasure and pain can reach you with nobody else in the room. The last pair goes somewhere even more personal. Who you think you are. One common translation of the fourth pair gives you fame and disgrace. If fame makes you picture celebrities, the pair is gone. You'll file it under other people's problems and move on, and the discourse will have said nothing to you at all. The Pali is yusa. You'll see it translated as fame, renown, glory, status, because the word covers all of them. Thanisaro bhikkhu goes with status. For this video, the useful word is standing. How much weight your name carries in a room where people know you. So put the celebrities down. You hold standing. In your family, on your team, in the group chat, on your street, with the neighbor whose opinion you'd say out loud doesn't matter to you. You know whose opinion carries weight and whose doesn't. You know which rooms you walk into taller, and you know the one room where something in your shoulders changes on the way in. And you maintain characters. The funny one, the reliable one, the good parent, the calm one. Nobody handed those to you. Somewhere along the way you noticed which version of you people responded to, and you've kept it running ever since. This isn't new, by the way. Sun Wukong could smash the gates of heaven, and it settled nothing in him, because he needed heaven to write the title down. That's a story, and I'm using it as one. Now apply pressure. The calm one loses their temper in front of everybody. The smart one has no answer in the meeting. The successful one gets walked out of the building with a box. The good parent watches their kid go through something they can't fix. Sometimes the reaction is bigger than the event, because the event landed on an identity as well. Here's the strange part, and it's where this chapter gets its name. The thing you're defending isn't in the room. It's a version of you that lives inside other people's heads, and you've never seen it. You can't open it or check it, and you don't get to correct it. Think about how little it's built from. A handful of meetings, and whatever your face was doing on a morning you felt ill. You spend a serious amount of your life managing the reputation of somebody you've never met. You might have seen The Social Network. It opens on a rejection in a bar, and it keeps coming back to that. Jesse Eisenberg plays a version of Mark Zuckerberg, and even as Facebook turns into something enormous, the film keeps returning to much smaller rooms. Who gets let in, and which table in which club? The money arrives. The film keeps asking whether the standing he wanted came with it. The last thing it shows you is a man alone with a laptop, refreshing a page, waiting on one person to answer. He built the company. He's still waiting. One more thing before the part that changes the list. You can count these 8 off cleanly, and in a life they almost never turn up one at a time. The film is a good example of that as well. The company, the money, the friend he loses, the rooms he still can't get into. Several of the 8 at once, and no way to take them in order. The promotion works the same way. Gain, standing, praise, and a fresh fear of losing all 3, landing in the same 10 seconds. We separate them for 20 minutes because that's how you learn them. Nothing separates them on a Tuesday. Now look at what I've been showing you for 4 chapters. Loss, blame, pain, disgrace. The ones that hurt. The discourse doesn't stop there. It says the untrained mind gets consumed by the other 4 as well. Gain, praise, pleasure, standing. The text's own split is desirable and undesirable. Nothing in it calls the first 4 good. It describes what an untrained mind does with each one. It welcomes the desirable. It rebels against the undesirable. And either way, the mind gets consumed. Welcoming and fighting are 2 ways of being taken. That's what the pairing exposes. And the desirable side is the one you never think to check, because while it's going well, nothing feels wrong. Which leaves the question the discourse actually cares about. What changes for somebody who doesn't get taken? Here's what the discourse says about the person who is trained and the person who hasn't. The 8 turn up for both of them. Gain still happens. Loss still happens. Praise and blame still arrive. Pleasant and painful experience still happens. And standing still rises and falls in the rooms where they're known. Nobody in this material gets to opt out of the weather. The difference is what the mind does with what arrived. One of them meets the desirable half and welcomes it, meets the undesirable half and fights it, and gets consumed by both. Their week gets written by whatever showed up in it. The other one meets the same 8 and sees what they are. In Thanissaro Bhikkhu's rendering, the trained disciple discerns each condition as inconstant, stressful, subject to change. That's the move the discourse keeps making, over and over, for all 8 of them. The praise will change. The blame will change. The money will change. Your standing will change. The feeling in your body right now will change. None of that stops a condition arriving. It stops the condition consuming the whole mind. Elsewhere in the early texts, you'll meet a related quality called upekkha, equanimity in English, which can sound like numbness or like somebody who has quietly stopped caring. A useful way to understand it is staying level while pleasant and unpleasant conditions come and go. This discourse gives you the recognition. It doesn't give you the training that makes that recognition possible under pressure at 4:30 on an ordinary Tuesday. That's what the rest of the Buddhist path is for, and it's a much longer story than one discourse. So go back to Tuesday. The corridor at 8:52, the news at 11:20, the package at 2:05, the tone at 4:30. By 4:30, 4 conditions had moved through your day. The question the teaching leaves you with is how much have you moved with them? If you want more of this, subscribe and turn on notifications. We publish twice a week. And tell me in the comments which of the 4 pairs runs your week. Stay curious. Stay wise.